You know, wrestling a gator at Circle Bar B, Nature Reserve, something crazy.
I just want to let you guys
Could be
know
a
we are
combination.
recording now. So
Thank you.
So we have to behave ourselves?
Thanks, Jose.
no problem.
Okay. It's a couple minutes past 7, so the only people I have not, regulars whose presence I've not noted are John Carter, Dave Vanell, and Nigel. So why don't we begin? I would entertain a motion to approve tonight's agenda.
I so move.
Second.
Thank you all. Anybody opposed? Thank you. I would accept a motion to approve the minutes from the February 2nd meeting. Anybody?
So moved.
Jan?
Mark Malcolm, second.
Who's that?
Mark seconding.
Mark. Thank you. Anybody opposed? All right. We'll consider that unanimous. So before we start, it's always, the path is sure if we know our destination. So just to keep it before our mind, our goal is to finish our task, to have a proposed final draft of the transportation connectivity section by early April, and we're roughly on track. Though the work will become a little more arduous. So today we're starting off with item number 4, as requested by our working group. We had a discussion about the roadway improvements in the proposed in the 2013-14 comp plan, and so we thought it would be useful to have DDOT come and present their view of the roadway improvements. So with that, I would ask, who's leading this? Tom, are you leading it, or Jeff, or?
This is Mike Garcia and John King are going to.
Mike is leading it. Okay. Okay.
I just need the ability to screen share.
You should be having presenter privileges now.
All right. Let me get to the correct one. Make sure I can't see everybody, so it works out well. All right. Does everybody see that screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Yep.
All right. So before I get into this, so what we wanted to do is kind of take a little bit of a step back and kind of give everyone a little bit of background, a little history to understanding why the elements went into the transportation and went into the Reston Plan Phase 1, so that everyone kind of gets on the same page. We're also going to briefly kind of walk through kind of a strategy document, and it's very, very high level, just about how go about trying to move from plan to implementation so that these things become reality. And then the final piece is we'll walk through a little bit of the facilities and kind of, we'll walk through a little bit of the facilities and kind of talk to you about the individual ones. There were kind of 10 that were kind of attention was drawn to a little bit in the Reston network analysis in terms of the tiers. So we'll kind of talk briefly to those. And then there's a few of the grid links that we'll just kind of talk to. And again, I want to emphasize that we're here to kind of provide information, get everyone on the same page. In no way were we trying to make any kind of recommendations. It's a kind of our hope that you all take the information, kind of think about it, and we can come back with additional information for some of the individual things we think are something we want to kind of talk to in a little bit more detail. And one of those I'll just kind of say right now is that road linkage between Isaac Newton Square and American Dreamway. Some of you all obviously commonly refer to that as the road to nowhere. Just kind of want to just give you just probably about a 30-second background on it, and then we'll kind of come back at a later meeting and kind of touch on it in a little bit more detail, just in terms of getting an understanding from everybody so that we can kind of move forward from here. So with that, I'm going to kind of move into it. So a little bit about the intro, kind of, and the reason I chose this is that I wanted everyone to understand that there's a little bit of background behind this, and I think just maybe about 30 seconds or 45 seconds of context might help everyone. So so why the study? Well, Metro was funded and it was going to be built. So what started is that the Reston Metro Advisory Group was formed around 2006, and it was formed to kind of start making recommendations around the future Metro rail stations, the three I've highlighted in front of you: Wheelie, Reston, and Herndon Monroe. And from there, they kind of started making recommendations. But in 2008, 2009, there was something called the Area Plan Review Cycle, APR, and there were a lot of nominations that were filed in the Reston area, specifically in kind of the metro stations. And because of that, a special study was formed, which is commonly referred to as the Reston Master Plan Phase 1 study. So what does that kind of leave us to now? So what we kind of were trying to look at were kind of ways to fold the was our MAG or Reston Metro Rail Advisory Group recommendations into the Reston Master Plan study and move that forward. So I think that part is just to kind of make it clear that, you know, we started from a citizen advisory committee, really kind of making the recommendations that DOT kind of work with the task force to advance further into the plan. I'd also, the other part I wanted to kind of put out there is that during this time was when the bicycle master plan was kind of being created and formed, and they started first with Tyson's and used a 2-mile radius outside of Tyson's as kind of the phase 1, and then phase 2 was the rest of the county, including Reston. So when this plan was being adopted, they were still working on kind of the bicycle master plan for the rest of the area. So the reason I kind of point that out is that the street network was kind of formed a little bit, and then it was informed a little bit more about the bicycle master plan. And I think what that does is this gives this group a little bit of an understanding to kind of say, okay, well, we had that effort, and the rest of the master plan was done prior to the bicycle master plan being completed. We can kind of think about alternative and additional connections that may not have kind of been there throughout all of Reston, and use that to make recommendations for the county's now ongoing active transportation plan, so that can be moved forward and kind of folded into that effort. So I just kind of wanted to kind of set the stage for that. But I'd also want to say is that, you know, we don't plan in the past, but the past does shape our plans for the future. So a little context, as I've kind of laid out, will go a long way to help understanding the plan recommendations as so that we can make any adjustments where necessary. And I will say this is a living and breathing document, so it is something being the comprehensive plan. So that is why we kind of wanted to, you know, have this refresher from time to time. And we do have the Reston monitoring that is now up and running. And I would recommend you all go and visit that website. We'd be happy to share that as well with the group. So with that, I'll turn it over to John for a little bit.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate that that introduction. The part I'm going to speak to tonight is some fairly high level planning discussion or information. Basically, the thought was to sort of step back a little bit and think about, you know, what we're doing. You know, comprehensive planning. So certainly it'll be, you know, a bit of a information that I'm sure a lot of you know already, but I feel like it doesn't hurt to refresh, you know, the overall effort that we're undertaking. So why do we plan comprehensively? It's the opportunity for communities to create a vision of how they want to grow and change. And it provides guidance for future decision making. Mike was giving a little bit of history now, and we're all seeing how you know, how the planning that's been done before is playing out in the now present, which was then the future. And I have a quote here from Daniel Burnham. I won't read the whole thing, but if you have a chance, you know, please read it at your leisure. A couple of points, though, I think are really, really valuable, and here are when doing comprehensive planning, I think it's important to aim high, you know, with your goals and your aspirations and your vision of how you believe your community can and should be, and that as Mike said, it's a work that you do, and the plan, it becomes a living thing. It asserts itself, as he says, with ever growing consistency. So over time, this document it does its thing. It plays out in the real world. And remember that, our kids, their kids, they're all going to be living in this community, hopefully. So what do we want them, what kind of community do we want them to live in? Next slide. And another familiar name to all of you, Robert Simon, his words about community, and that being the whole discussion, really. Having facilities available for people of all kinds, that's the most important thing. Next slide. So we'll talk a lot about multimodalism. I think Mike might have already said the word, or multimodal. You'll probably hear that. It's a bit of a jargon, but it basically means multiple ways for people to get around, walking, biking, bus, driving, etc. And also the connections between those modes. That's another important aspect, and one that it's important to understand and focus on. Next slide. So again, why do we do multimodal planning? It's because people sometimes don't have cars. They don't have other means to get around other than walking or potentially biking. Those kind of modes are great for local travel. You take potentially public transit for longer trips, drive when necessary. People I think typically want to have options, in terms of their transport. Communities benefit from more efficient use of land. If you have very wide roadways, that's valuable land, lots of parking lots, that's valuable land that could be used for other purposes, more community-friendly purposes. And there are obviously impacts, including folks' time, stuck in traffic, money. A lot of times time equals money for most people. You could, spend that shopping, working, playing, all the things you want or need to do. Transportation and the transportation system has an impact on that. It also can affect your physical fitness and the environment. I won't go through the whole list of reasons why we try and have efficient transportation systems, but there's a multitude. Mike, next slide. So this is just a quick overview, and the reason I have this slide in here tonight is just to show that there are sort of quantifiable or categorical ways you can look and see if a community is built around the automobile, it's dependent on the automobile, or if it does have a more multimodal focus. So for vehicle ownership and travel, typically auto-dependent communities, that'll be, most folks will have 1 or 2 or 3 cars, and that's how they'll make most of their trips. If you have a multimodal system, you can typically, have fewer cars and use them less, like your trip making. For land use, auto-dependent communities typically have single-use development patterns. They're lower density. They have dispersed destinations, which is why you typically have to drive everywhere. Multimodal is what I think we have in the Reston plan now in the TSA areas. It's that more medium to high density use, the mixed use development patterns with cluster destinations, so you can get to your different destinations more easily. And then road and street design, obviously the auto-dependent community would emphasize the automobile. You have higher travel speeds, large blocks, wide roads, etc. And then for multimodal, it's again like what I think we're going for in the Reston plan, which is potentially lower travel speeds, smaller blocks, more compact roadways that can serve all different kinds of users. The roads again don't just have to be for the car; they can also carry bicyclists, walkers, buses, etc. Next slide, please. So again, I mentioned some of the work that's been done before, and we talked about it a few of our past meetings, the Reston network analysis and its recommendations. So as Mike said, there was obviously lots of work going on in the planning of Reston over the last 10 plus years, well, longer than that. But the Reston network analysis was basically a continuation of that effort, earlier effort that phase 1 planning effort. And it took a detailed look, an operational analysis of the potential enhanced street network. It did provide recommendations for roadway improvements in terms of priorities, and it contributed to the development of an implementation strategy for those improvements. Next slide. And so we mentioned that transportation strategy. I believe that was emailed to you all last week. Basically, it is another high-level document, but it does provide a really good framework for how to realize the community's vision for the future transportation network. So identify the priority improvement projects, reduce those single occupant vehicle trips that really can snare up your roadways. Implement those improvements over time is a long planning. Again, we're doing long range planning. So implementing those projects over that 40-year plus timeline. Again, I think the intent of the strategy is to match the needs of development with the roadway projects. And so there does have to be a little bit of flexibility in terms of being able to react. And part of that is monitoring. So, I think what you want to do is basically you have an idea, but then you need to fact check it, collect the data, see how your roadways are doing. If new development comes in, is that impacting an area significantly, and be able to respond to change. Next slide. And so I won't go through these are the priority roadway projects. Mike is going to talk through them later than they were previously mentioned. Next slide. And so one of the ways that you can reduce the single occupancy vehicle trips is through land use planning. I won't get into that, but that is part of what the phase 1 did was it focused mixed use development in these activity centers. As Mike said, there's a very significant regional transit investment coming online, the Silver Line phase 2 that'll go through Reston. Having those additional residential units near that high capacity transit service, we think will certainly contribute to improving conditions overall. And then what we also do is work with developers when they come in with new development to reduce those trips through our travel demand management program. Excuse me. And that effort county staff basically works to establish a goal and meet or exceed that goal, reducing trips from a new development. Next slide.
So this is on me. Thanks, John. I just make sure that everyone understands that, the county has a goal or a way to kind of manage growth in the county, and it's directed into the activity centers. And Reston happens to be one of those activity centers. So kind of the Metro Rail was a way for the county to help facilitate that growth and to manage the density that was coming in, so it's a big investment that's part of the strategy document. So I just wanted to kind of make sure we've made that point clear. But what we're going to do is take 5 minutes to see if there's any kind of clarifying questions before I delve into the next part to kind of finish off the presentation, if there are any. If not, we can continue on.
Any questions?
Yeah, I think this is Burton. I'm curious if you could speak a little bit more about the details of the strategy for reducing SOV demand and the details of PDM. Thanks.
Sure. So this is Mike. So what we have listed in the plan is the reductions by proximity to metro being office or residential. One of the ways that we achieve that is it's anticipated and expected that there will be a reduction in the single occupancy vehicles because there is that close proximity to Metro Rail. We have studies and surveys that show that people who live and work close to Metro Rail inherently reduce their actual ability to want to to drive. So they want to walk, they want to bike, they want to take the transit, they want to do those other things. And we have that density that's kind of put in there. So when you kind of build up that activity, then that lowers you build up the densification, and that to get from one spot to another, it's not going to make sense to get in your car and drive trying to find another parking spot when you can walk 2 minutes over to the next spot. So that's kind of one of the strategies behind kind of putting the mixed use centers together. The other thing we kind of do is also try to work through policy programs through the proffers to have developers actively work to reduce their demands on the actual on the road network through cars, so that we can increase the reliance on walking and biking, making use of the metro that's there. And we do that through the TDM program. So we have them commit to proffers that will say that they will do certain things, such as facilitating teleworking, for instance, or making community working spaces for another, or making metro more accessible through putting in information and displays in their kiosks and their lobby areas to make it easier and understood to use the metro, to kind of through programs to help educate people. So those are kind of the ways we do it. Again, that's kind of, it's part of put into our policy section of our policy plan, but it's not kind of regurgitated in every single part of the comprehensive plan for all of Fairfax County.
Hey Mike, can I add
Okay, thanks.
one quick thing to that too?
Thanks,
So
Jeff.
one of the most important things about TDM, this is Jeff, by the way, from Fairfax TOT. One of the most important things about TDM is that it focuses on the peak hours. So the AM and the PM, most busy times, highest trip generating times each day, and during the weekday. And the strategies that are taken to reduce it's kind of two different ways you do it. One is that you take a look at all of the different modes and you look at what their mode split is. So for example, if you have your vehicular single occupant driver, you have your bicyclists, you have your transit riders, you have all of the various modes. You look at that percentage split and you try and increase the number that are doing any other mode except for being a single occupant user. The way that the county does it is we use what's called the Institute of Traffic Engineers. ITE has a guidebook for how many trips are generated in each of those peaks depending on a specific use. So for example, an office building generates X number of trips per 1,000 square feet of office. And what we try and do is reduce that number through programmatic means. So some of the programs that Mike mentioned, we try and reduce that number over time, so that you have less generation, less trips on the road. And those programmatic means have been very, very successful and shown to be very successful nationwide, internationally. And within Reston, within the county, we have all kinds of examples of where that's been very, very successful. So I think the important clarification there is that it's really just focusing on the peak hour, not necessarily midday or on a weekend or anything like that. I just wanted to add that clarification to it.
Jeff, I have a question. You and I have chatted about this over the years, but has Fairfax County yet done an independent evaluation of the reports that we get from developers on their success of TDM? I know you get reports at specified intervals from them done by their own traffic consultants, but has Fairfax County yet done its own independent assessment of that?
So specifically, we have not done the independent assessment. We have requested funds through a couple different grants. We tried for one last year and didn't win that grant. So we're trying again this year with a little bit more robust of a grant. Hopefully we'll secure that. The idea is to go and do counts at various developments selected at random around the county to corroborate the traffic counts that were taken by a certified engineer. We're fairly confident that the engineers that have done the counts, their PE is on the line, really. So if they are unethical and they misrepresent really what's gone on there, that's a problem for them. So their ethics and PE certification is important to them. So I would assume they wouldn't want to lose that. But we're certainly interested in corroborating that and making, and the other part of it is getting our own data to use so that we can start to look a little bit closer on what exactly is the trip generation for the county. I mentioned those ITE rates. That's a very general take across the board for the United States for a generic place. Now they've tried to narrow that down a little bit more to a suburb or an urban place, but again, these are very generic. They've taken samples from all over the place and tried to put them into one basket. And what we found is that in Fairfax County, our general trip generation is actually reduced without even doing anything from what ITE says. So you're already looking at a 10 to 15%, depending on where you are, reduction from what ITE says. And any programmatic elements would now be on top of that. So we're starting in a good place just because of where we live when you look at the ITE rates. But we are definitely looking to corroborate that and get some more base data to understand how Fairfax County stands versus a generic and very respected standard like ITE.
I'm concerned about.
Question for you, Jeffrey. Mike, actually. Jeffrey, hi. I understand the need to go reduce the single occupancy vehicle, but there are still times and places in Reston. This is great for the mixed development near the metro stations, but it's more difficult for people who live in South Reston or way in North Reston that find it more convenient and accessible to use a single occupancy vehicle. I was wondering about whether you will take into account roads and the fact that some people will still need to use the single occupancy vehicle, say to go to appointments, doctor appointments, that sort of thing. Thank you.
Yeah, certainly. We definitely take into account that there is a need for single occupant vehicles. There will seemingly always be in Fairfax County. We're not the middle of Manhattan, but we have a need for vehicular travel in Fairfax County. So that's taken into account, and we make sure that the roadways have enough capacity to handle a percentage of the traffic that will be from some of the single-family residents, like you're talking in South and North Reston. But the focus really is on a lot of the new development that's coming in, because you can really get best bang for your buck on a multi-family development or an office building or something that's coming in new like that. The county also does have another program that targets existing developments. And what that program does is it does a lot of ride matching or van pool ride matching is really the biggest thing. It helps people understand that there's another way I can commute. So while it may be most convenient for me to take a car, it just happens that I live within a close distance to 5 other people, and that we can all get together and we're all going the same direction, and we can get in a van pool together, and now there's 4 less vehicles on the road because 5 of us got together and rode in a van pool. So it's that sort of realization that there is another way. You may not be stuck in just an option where you have to take your car every single day, maybe once a week, maybe twice a week you're able to do that. And that once or twice a week collectively over the course of the entire county really can add up and make a big difference as far as the total number of vehicles on the road and help us with some of the congestion that we see in certain places.
Okay.
And I'll also add on to just to help out is the more people we can get to incentivize to walk and bike and take transit through directing growth into the activity centers, it means that there's less people who are actually in their car driving around. So that in essence also helps to kind of alleviate the burden on the road network for people who choose and want to and need to drive. So we're trying to, and that's why we always try to say we're not a war on cars. We're just trying to balance all the modes appropriately as best we can to make sure that the people who want to bike, people who want to walk, the people who want to drive can do so throughout Reston.
Okay. Any other
Thank
questions?
you very much. That's exactly what I was thinking of. Look at the situation and balance. Balance is the key.
Thank
I
you,
have a
Jan.
question.
Lynn, please.
or two or three. Actually, I have one observation and two questions. I wanted to appreciate the Burnham quote at the beginning of the presentation, but I do want to point out one word that struck me, and that is logical. So I just want to make sure that our Department of Transportation professionals, understand that we are looking for logical solutions and not just anything. So my first question has to do with the auto-dependent and multimodal comparison that was presented. And I noticed that that was from Victoria, Australia. And I just don't think that we have similar economic or developmental, there's just, I don't see a corollary between Reston and Victoria. So I'm questioning the that portion of the presentation. And then additionally, in terms of Reston's transportation strategy as an overarching plan and strategy, my question is, who is developing that? Is it Virginia's Department of Transportation that's developing our strategy, or is it the citizens of Reston that are helping the Department of Transportation to create a strategy that is going to be embraced by the community? Thank you.
So in terms of, I'll take the second question first and the first question second. In terms of developing the overall transportation strategy, that is something that the county has put together with input from the citizens. It all started from the actual master plan and then working through the Reston network analysis, which helped prioritize things. So working through that effort, combining the transit development plan, which also looked at revamping and retooling all the connector service around the metro stations. They put together kind of not only a here's the improvements, but tiered them, but also looked at the funding plan and looked outwards for 40 years and said, how are we going to actually, what resources and revenues are available for Reston specific to be able to implement this? So it is a Reston specific document for Reston strategies. It's not an all-encompassing strategy, but it is a wide-ranging document that really gets as much as we possibly can to really look at how we implement these facilities over time. And again, I will say that part of it is obviously through development as well, that kind of, and as development, and nobody can predict when development will come on, so we kind of have a general idea based on when we think it might happen, but we do have a good idea for when we can get some of those larger projects in, and so that's what we've kind of worked through in the strategy document. Going back.
So Mike,
Yeah.
This is Tom Bashadny. I want to go just a little bit step further on that. So when the board did adopt the comprehensive plan amendment in June of 2014, there were several follow-on motions, and two of them were related to transportation. So one of them was to have a kind of a comprehensive process that involved the community in developing the Reston network analysis. So we did work with a task force of community members to prepare that, and the other was to prepare a funding plan. And so we also prepared that to look out for 40 years in terms of how to implement the recommendations that were included in the comprehensive plan. But we didn't do that in a vacuum. We definitely had a significant amount of community engagement. There were a number of community meetings in addition to the working group that was established. And so it wasn't the Department of Transportation, back in our offices trying to figure this out. There was a lot of community engagement that went into putting together that strategy.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I do want to add one more factoid, and that is that the median age in Reston is 39.8 years, 38.7 for men, and 41 years for women. So I just think that you need to keep that in mind when you're thinking about folks walking and biking from the PRC areas. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. I'd also just want to kind of put out there that, it is a long-term document, so we're trying to make sure that as we look out 30 years that we plan for both the younger and the older generations and the generations for now. So thank you for that.
May I suggest that we proceed, if the working group is okay with this, proceed with the presentation so we can get through this and then do our own work tonight? Is that okay?
Yes. Yeah, please.
Well, I'm asking my
Oh, sorry.
committee members.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you for keeping us on track, John.
Okay.
Could I just ask one question? Will Mike or the other members of the transportation staff be around for the rest of the meeting? So if we have questions, that's what I thought. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so I'll try to go through this a little quickly so that way we can go on to the discussion questions. So what I wanted to point out real quick is that we started from the Reston Metro Advisory Group when we started to put these recommendations together. We didn't start from just scratch and putting lines all over the place. So we took what the citizen group had put together and we took that and we moved it forward. So that's when we moved into this enhanced street network. So what we did is anything that's in purple or that's in green or that's in blue all started from that group. And then we started to make the additions in red where we try to make some modifications or look at things that we thought might be helpful. So I wanted to at least kind of put that forward that this has always been a collaborative effort with citizens and community members of Reston, and we've always tried to work with as a team to kind of see and realize the vision for what Reston is and wants to be. So
And
the reason
we're going to get a copy of this PowerPoint presentation, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
And so that one was shown to the task force in 2012. I brought this one forward too real quick to show that Pinecrest was added about a year later. So when we kind of went through additional effort and evaluation and discussions with the task force, we ended up adding another link to the network. And that's one I know that you all kind of that had been asked about during this group. So with that, I was going to walk through the top 10 real quick. So, and this is kind of just getting a brief understanding and so that everyone can kind of see where we are. So one of the top priorities in Reston is obviously the Soapstone connector to connect from Soapstone across the Dulles Toll Road over to Sunset Hills. And what we're working through now is a way to kind of make that connection work. We kind of had it as a 4-lane connection. Ultimately, I think there is the plan to accommodate it, but it may be some interim improvement before then. And there will also be bike lanes and sidewalks along both sides of the actual grid link itself. And the other point to put forward or to make sure people understood is that Soapstone, South Lakes, and Town Center are all meant to be more localized connections serving Reston, whereas Fairfax County Parkway, Reston Parkway, and to some extent Wheelie Avenue are meant to be a little bit more regional because they connect to the actual Dulles Toll Road. So that's kind of a way to kind of think about them when we were putting these forward. The next one is Town Center Parkway. Again, this also scored very high because of the connectivity across the toll road. The first thing I wanted to point out is that the Town Center Parkway connection actually used to go from Sunset Hills, if you follow my cursor on the screen, and it used to go to the right and connect over to Edmund Haley on this side. When the Metro was coming in, they kind of looked at the public land that was available to be able to site some of the facilities. In this instance, they actually were able to put the head house and the the bus loop through in around this location, and when doing so, then we had to look for an alternative location for the Town Center Parkway underpass. And so with that, we were able to locate one a little bit to the west. As along with this, we actually invested some money, the county did, into the Silver Line project by doing what's called underpinning the rail line here. So what that allows us to do is excavate under the rail line at a future date to actually construct the underpass, so we don't have to stop service for the Metro line. Another one that was put forward, I'm going to have to move something real quick, sorry. Another one was the Reston Parkway widening from the Dulles Toll Road south to South Lakes Drive. If you recall, when we did when Reston Parkway was on the plan, there was a widening section that went to the north all the way up to, I believe, Barron Cameron. And we looked at that and thought there needs to be a little bit of balance. It didn't seem to, the community didn't want that, and we heard the task force at that time that wasn't wanted, but we needed some balance. So we ended up looking at that, and we saw that from South Lakes to the to the Dulles Toll Road, there was a lot of congestion and some ability and some need to be able to relieve some of that congestion. So this goes back to looking at one of the vehicular metrics. So we did that, and that's how the widening of the Parkway to the South Lakes came onto the plan with the Fairfax the Reston Master Plan Phase 1. Fairfax County Parkway has always been on the plan since the 80s for 6 lanes. In this instance, we kind of reaffirmed with it that it should stay 6 lanes in the Reston area. It is 6 lanes to the north of Dulles Toll Road. And not only that, but there's a currently ongoing Fairfax County Parkway study that's been going on for a few years now that has actually looked at and refined multiple times the Parkway recommendations, and it is still reaffirming 6 lanes, at least in this particular segment. So with that, we do have a Fairfax County Parkway website that you all can log on to, but with kind of no surprise that it is recommending 6 lanes still. The one instance in this one is that HOV is no longer being recommended on the Parkway. It was shown to not really be that used by HOV users. So the recommendation is to turn that into a general purpose lane. However, we are still looking at HOV feeders from the Parkway to the toll road, seeing that could be a benefit. And there is going to be an emphasis on pedestrian and bicycle trails to go along with the Parkway as well. The next one was the Fairfax County Parkway at Sunrise Valley Drive. This was an interchange recommendation. This did come on during the Reston Master Plan Phase 1. We have a little bit of more documentation behind it, but what we were showing is that there was such a demand to go in all sorts of directions from Fairfax County Parkway, not only north and south, but also east and west on Sunrise Valley Drive, and even from Sunrise Valley Drive to go north and south on the Parkway, that we were getting to the point where even triple lefts on like the Parkway were not being able to handle the volume. And when you get to that sort of ability to kind of go to, when you're looking at triple lefts and quadruple rights and everything, the Parkway, the intersection becomes so wide that they're not even walkable or bikeable across that anymore. So the recommendation was to go to some form of grade separation, and what that is, it would still need to be engineered and designed, but we do have some concept of that, again, with the Fairfax County Parkway study. The South Lakes Drive was also shown to be another connection that could be pretty well used in the Reston area. This one obviously is to the east. And the way it was actually put together was an extension of South Lakes, not meandering through, but kind of cutting through this particular area. And this area kind of was chosen because this is the high point in between. If you actually go to the east on Dulles Toll Road to the west, you can see that the high point starts to kind of go away. So that's kind of why this particular area was chosen. Some field reconnaissance was done when we were looking at this, and to kind of get it across. Now we do have some applications that have come through that have kind of refined a little bit on the north side about how this connection does tie into Sunset Hills. Fox Mill Road was another one that was asked about. Again, looking from Reston Parkway across Fairfax County Parkway all the way over to the west to Monroe as a 4-lane facility. In many segments of Fox Mill Road, there are right turn lanes that have been constructed. Pavement has been put down. There are a few segments where it's a 2-lane in each direction, but we have the 4-lane section for the most parts. I think what we could do is look to see how we could implement a little bit more of a tighter 4-way roadway with obviously with the accompanying pedestrian and bicycle facilities that come along with it, to make sure that we could get that in the future. This is not a new recommendation. This was one that predates the Reston Master Plan Phase 1 study. Monroe Street was another one for 4 lanes. Again, this one also predates the Reston Master Plan Phase 1 study, but this talks about the need for 4 lanes to connect over to the Dulles Toll Road to get into Town of Hardin, where it matches up with the 4-lane facility. West Ox Road is another one that kind of runs a little bit parallel to Fox Mill. We have gone through applications. Again, this is from Centerville Road, getting across Fairfax County Parkway, connecting over to the east. So we have as 4 lanes on the plan, and we have gone through instances where we've negotiated right away through rezoning cases that have come through along West Ox to have the ability to add a a second lane in either the east or westbound direction. So we are working through to accommodate 4 lanes. Where we haven't, we would need to see what needs to be done. But I think for the most part, we are making sure that we accommodate this. And at such time as we need to in the future, it could be improved to a 4-lane section, again, with the necessary pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure. This is the Pinecrest Road extension that we had talked about. I zoomed out a little bit because I thought it might be a little bit more helpful. Again, I showed that this kind of came on a little bit later in the plan process. It's an extension from Pinecrest from Glade exists to South Lakes now, and we saw it as a way to get people from the neighborhood on the south of Reston through to Sunrise Valley Drive to get up to the Reston station, which would be about right here. You access it through Edmund Haley or through the development that's kind of come through here now. It's through Reston 1, I believe it is, Reston Crescent, I apologize, and then kind of get up to the metro station. So we saw it as a way for the community to be able to access the metro station. I saw that there is another connection that kind of looks through, kind of working through the Reston Association area. If there's a way to start the connection and kind of meander over and take advantage of some of the existing parking lots and developments that's there, we're always looking to try to do that. That's kind of a lot of how the enhanced street network was formed a little bit, actually looking through the kind of the parking lot connections and saw where we could get in feasible and usable connections through particular areas. We don't have it kind of skirting the edge because there is actually a stream valley that kind of runs along the side. So that's why it kind of hugs a little bit more into the actual center. We did look at property lines. There is a property line boundary that kind of walks that's right around this particular area. So that's another thing that was kind of kept in mind as we were developing the enhanced street network and putting some of these links together. So this just talks, I'm going to talk to a little bit about 3 elements in the network, and I just wanted to make sure that people understood or kind of where these are coming from. We'll talk about that Isaac Newton one a little bit to the east of Wheelie Avenue. Again, the other one, the connector road to the west of Wheelie Avenue. Talk about a little bit about Reston Town Center North. And then I also wanted to put this note out here because I think it's kind of important. During the development of not only the Reston Master Plan, but also Innovation Center area, there was a lot of talk with the community and both landowners being represented by individuals on the task forces, as well as community members as well, that there should be reasonable flexibility in the grid to implement a land use vision. So that's why this note that I've put there below was added to all the enhanced street network maps to make sure that the networks are meant to show that we're looking for and planning for connectivity. And yes, we're generally looking for it to see if it can develop in the way that the networks were put together in the comprehensive plan, but there is flexibility to be able to modify them for circumstances that we either didn't know at the time of the plan or that developments have come through and say, I have another way of making this work, and this is a vision, and staff can look to evaluate that along with making sure the community can look at it too. So I just wanted to point that out real quick. The one I wanted to point to, and this is the other thing I wanted to point out, is that we went through this area, again, the purple being the RMAG recommendations, and then the orange being DOT adding on top of it. We even went through and had to take out some of the RMAG recommendations. For example, these lines right here that are dashed in red because they just didn't make sense from a network connection. So we did try to look through and take some little bit of feasibility and understanding and block size into account when we're looking at these connections. So that's why I wanted to put this in here real quick. But this talks about the connection to the east. Again, this is the one I've circled it here. It's one that was circled before and sent out to this working group. And this is the connection in question here. I think what I wanted to make point, and it was something where we could definitely need clarity in the plan text, is that this connection is meant to go along the property line and meant to be put in with the redevelopment of this site if there is redevelopment of this site. It is not meant to intrude in any way upon Lake Fairfax Park itself. So I think that is clarification that needs to be added to the plan to make sure that we understand that. And if there needs to be a modification in terms of like pulling it down a little bit so that people make sure that point is made clear, happy to kind of do that. But I wanted to at least acknowledge that it was meant to come in with redevelopment and not be on Lake Fairfax.
I think modification is in order.
Okay. The one over here, I don't really want to have a discussion, but I just wanted to at least put it out there so that you all could see how we drew the grid link with the golf course here and kind of how we tried to hug the WNOD trail and come up to American Dreamway. Again, I think this is one we've heard from this working group loud and clear. I think what we want to be able to do another meeting, is to kind of show the trade-offs, so that if this connection doesn't move forward, then just where the traffic goes, and then have a discussion with the group in terms of, okay, if this connection comes off the plan, is there another ability for us to provide another pedestrian or bike connection, or do we look at anything else that might replace it? If not, okay, we've at least had the discussion, but I think I don't want to, I understand this is a lightning rod for the group, and I wanted to at least acknowledge it here tonight. The other one I wanted to talk through was the Reston Town Center North. This is what was added to the comprehensive plan. It was the extension of of Library Street from the Metro Rail all the way up to connect up to Barron Cameron. It was meant to kind of connect the town center all the way through the heart of Reston Town Center to get through the redevelopment properties. And this connection was actually put in with the redevelopment Boston properties, I believe. So it does have proffers, and there is it is going to be constructed with their property. The reason I brought this one up is that there's been some modifications to this grid, and there continue to be modifications to this particular element. But one thing I wanted to make sure is that there is that one key north-south connection, and there does need to be some east-west connectivity. But how that gets done, again, I go back to the note that I referred to you in a few slides ago, is that let the land use kind of help develop that connectivity. And so it's still being worked through with the I forget which group is working with it now, but it's still being worked through now. So that's what I want to do, at least kind of close on that. So with that finishes kind of what we have brought tonight,
Hey,
and
Mike.
what we wanted to at least put out there. Yes.
Mike, can I just add to your point a little bit? Is these
Yes.
various connections in the grid are really intended to provide alternative paths for traffic, and to provide a more conducive environment for pedestrians and bicycles. So right now, if you're traveling around Reston, you're going to be on some of the major arteries. You're going to be on Reston Parkway, Fairfax County Parkway, Wheelie, Sunset Hills, and Sunrise Valley. But the grid is really intended to allow that traffic to spread out, so that all the focus isn't on those main crossings, the ones that exist today. So the plan calls for 3 additional crossings to be added. It calls for the grid to support and provide alternatives. So Pinecrest, for example, provides relief to Reston Parkway and to an extent Fairfax County Parkway. Some of the other links provide relief to Sunrise Valley or Sunset Hills. So that really was the intention, was to spread the traffic out. We know the traffic is going to be there. And then also, because most of these connections, and I think all of these connections, are envisioned to be 2-lane connections, with the exception of the crossings over the toll road, they're to be done in a way that are very pedestrian friendly and bicycle friendly. So they're not just connections for cars, but they are connections for bikes and pedestrians as well. So I just wanted to add that to the conversation.
Questions from the working group?
I would like to jump in here. This is Tammy. I hope the county never again brings us a map with the road from nowhere. This is a hell no across the board. We have discussed this ad nauseum. Tom just referenced pedestrian and bike friendly. The WO&D is within spitting distance of that. So mark that little excuse off. The other one is that the connector road is American Dream Way, and that owner has said he will not allow connections to it, period. That's Wheelock, and that was, I don't know, Dave Bonnell was with me in Reston Planning and Zoning when we went over this, and they are going ahead with the permit for that property. So you have nothing to connect to there. We are adamant that we are a biophilic community. We are not allowing development of either golf course. So just get rid of that. In addition, please get rid of the concentric circles that show that go over and lap up onto non-present TSA property, because those also lap onto the golf courses. And this is a really ugly point in Reston. We do not want that, period. Thank you.
I have a different
Burton Griffith.
perspective on this.
This is,
I have a question.
I just wanted to say that we does not include everyone. I'm a member of this working group too. This is Burton. And I just don't feel as strongly as Tammy, and I don't want to be included in that strong we statement.
I agree. That's what I feel as well. And I've got a question though. I noticed with all of these plans, and they're wonderful, to my way of thinking, is there anything for Reston to be connected south? For example, to the government center or to Fairfax Mall. All of this is centered in Reston or going north. I love the improvements and the suggestions right down the board, but I was wondering, is there anywhere else that Fairfax County is considering a north Reston down to the south of Reston improvement?
So
Thank you.
this is Mike. So we do have obviously the Reston Parkway and Fairfax County Parkway, which are two facilities that kind of come down and meet to the government center area. So those are kind of the major ways to get down. I don't know that we'd want to plan another major connecting corridor, but what we are doing is looking at the Parkway and looking for ways to improve the travel time between Reston, both North and South Reston, to kind of, and the government and the Fairfax County Parkway does kind of skirt and kind of connect almost into the government center area. So a way to get down there. So we've looked at intersection improvements, interchange improvements. Again, the Fairfax County Parkway has those details. And I think you'll find that when you look at that, we're actually looking at ways to make sure that there is improved mobility between the government center area and Reston.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions or comments? This is a lot to absorb. Our absorption time goes beyond this evening, obviously. We'll get a copy of these slides and have more time to think about it and raise questions. But
John,
yes, I see
John,
Bill.
I'm sorry.
Bill has his hand up there. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, Mike, could I just ask a couple clarifying questions? The Reston Parkway widening between South Lakes and the toll road. I'm not sure I understand quite what benefit it provides, since the bridge itself is not going to be widened. And I hope that the bridge will eventually get a sidewalk and bike path across it, so it's not going to get wider. Is the widening of Reston Parkway there intended to what? If it isn't going to go move more people across the bridge, what is the purpose of it?
So what we saw through the analysis was that there was a lot of queuing and spillback coming into this particular, and it was people trying to get to the Dulles Toll Road, and there were also some people trying to get across as well. So the thought process and thinking is that if you're able to kind of, widen the facility, a selected widening between South Lakes and this particular point, then that would kind of help alleviate the burden. We were seeing there was a lot when we go through, and I'm going to recall from memory here, but
Sure.
we were seeing a lot of the actual analysis that we actually had spillback, and our point of evaluation was at Sunrise Valley Drive and the Reston Parkway. We were coming back all the way to, I think, at least the next intersection back on South Lakes. So the ability to try to accommodate the volume in this particular segment and get them where they get them at least queued up so they could kind of get to the Parkway would alleviate the area south of South Lakes. Another thing is that people who are coming up Reston Parkway couldn't even get to South Lakes to kind of get through to the east or west of Reston. So kind of having the queue form in here at least allowed people to get to the intersection and be able to go left or right to continue through other parts of Reston.
Okay, we can talk about it further. Just a couple of observations. One is, if you pack more cars in a wider area on Reston Parkway just to get them off of South Lake, and the folks on Sunrise Valley who are trying to get across Reston Parkway are already being backed up, and I can't see how it won't make that worse. for the people who live in Reston Heights and are going to be walking over to the Wegmans and the metro station, that too, they too will have an additional problem if you have a wider section of road there. My own feeling, and this is a feeling, and so I'm open to further discussion, but my own feeling is that it really doesn't do much other than pack a few more people into an area that they can't get out of very well, and meanwhile, it creates traffic problems elsewhere. I have a similar question about expanding Sunset Hills going into Reston Parkway. And again, where are they going to go once they do it if people are already concerned that there's too much traffic on that? One of the thoughts I've had, and I've expressed it to other people on the Task Force Transportation Committee, but I don't declare that anybody has agreed with me yet. But it seems to me that a major goal should be to shift traffic over to Fairfax County Parkway, which is why I'm not objecting to a widening there, and get less traffic, through traffic passing through Reston, the heart of what I consider the heart of Reston, which is Reston Parkway and Sunset Hills and Sunrise Valley. So those are my areas of concern that I'd like to talk about at some point. We can do it separately in greater detail. The Pinecrest extension, I like connections, and that seems to me the most important thing we can do. On the other hand, that one goes right through a wooded area. And for a biophilic community, if you can do it through the parking lots, that would be fabulous. But to drive it through there, I'm not sure is an attractive option. Also, and when I looked at the network analysis study, the Pinecrest extension had almost zero impact on hours saved, however that's measured. So at least there's a question on that one also. I have other questions too, but for tonight, that's enough to just alert you to my issues.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Yes, Lynn.
I just had, I want to first of all say what a great job I think that Mike and John have done on the presentation tonight. But I do have a recommendation for consideration, and that is that if a grid of streets is included in the comprehensive plan, which is what we are meeting about, then I would recommend that we not put staff recommendations in that grid of streets, but that we only show the streets that are in place or have been approved. I think it's disingenuous to developers and builders who are looking at the Reston comprehensive plan, and they think that those roads are going to be going in, and they're spending time and dollars putting together plans based on false assumptions. Thank you.
So just to clarify, those roads were staff recommendations, but they were incorporated in the comprehensive plan amendment that was approved by the board. So the original group was the Reston Metro Access Group had recommendations, and then additional connections were recommended by staff, and they were ultimately approved by the Board of Supervisors. So it wasn't that they're just, they're just staff recommendations. They're now board approved.
Well, my suggestion is that going forward and for this iteration of the comprehensive plan, that we limit the roadways to those that are in place and that those that have been approved.
Tom, I think what Lynn, let me try a clarification. I think Lynn is saying that she's advocating that roadways not be advanced by staff for inclusion in a plan for Board of Supervisor approval without a thorough process of dialogue with the community. Is that right, Lynn?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for clarifying, John.
Sure.
so
And we're
which-
not advocating to add any additional links to the network at this point. And in fact, there's some discussion that we will have with you in terms of some of the existing links in the network, but we're not advocating adding any additional links at this point.
And John, this is Mark Looney. I'll play county attorney again. Unless you include those road connections in the comprehensive plan, meaning the ones that you want, not just the ones that exist today, the county doesn't have the legal authority to ask for them when developers come through the process, whether it's right-of-way dedication, construction, or a combination thereof. And B, as I mentioned at the last meeting, they can't put public funding towards those improvements without them being in the capital improvements plan, which is a requirement of state code. And the comprehensive plan doubles as the capital improvements program for infrastructure like this. So unless and until you have aspirational road connections, transit connections, other infrastructure in the comprehensive plan, the county's unable to acquire it as a general matter, whether it's using public funds or private funds, because they can't compel it from developers and they can't fund it themselves.
Thanks for that clarification, Mark. Again, I don't think you're at odds with Lynn. Lynn understands that you made that point last week, and thank you for reminding us again. She's just saying that it shouldn't go into the plan for approval by the board without a thorough vetting with the community.
Right. Fair enough. And I take that as a criticism of the last go round. I'll just say, having participated for 4.5 years in that, there was plenty of discussion. It may not have included people on this call, but there was plenty of discussion among the task force and among the RMAG group and among others. And I can't help the fact that the personalities involved in this conversation were not the same personalities that were involved in the last discussion, but I'll defend Tom and Mike and the crew and say, absolutely, there was input into it. And Reston Association, RCC, everybody else had a seat at the table, and these were not arrived at through fiat. And I just
out that I wasn't here at the time, but I heard what you just described may have been generally the case, but was not the case for the so-called road to or from nowhere.
Yeah,
That's what I heard too.
fair enough.
Yeah, this is Bill, and I was involved just as Mark was. And I will say, it may have been, apparently it was in a presentation made in 2012, but I don't recall ever seeing it again. And so even some of us who were deeply involved were surprised later to see that road showing up. I'm not throwing stones at the staff or anything else, but it wasn't extensively discussed in any meeting I was in.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions?
Yeah, John, I have a note, if I could. Can you hear me, John?
Yes, I can, John.
Okay, on Lynn's point and Mark's point, there are some areas, and I'll mention two, Association Drive and the Herndon Monroe area. Those, the grid of streets is very difficult to put down on it. It's a conjecture at best. I would suggest we not follow Lynn's guide there and not show the grid, but maybe there's another way to take care of the concerns that Mark has. That, I mean, maybe we could just say we want a grid of streets there, but we just don't know yet where or what it is. The Herndon Monroe, it goes through that wetlands. There's a lot of topography, and the Association Drive, who knows what's going to happen, but we probably don't have a lot of intelligence at this point. So I think both Lynn and Mark have good points, and maybe we can combine them in some clever way. But my main point is that the land use discussion that we just had was all about the TSAs. And we're going to get to the numbers in some future point, but as much as a third of the development from the comp plan perspective is going to be outside the TSAs. Have we missed anything in these facilities, Mike, that once you consider I mean, most of the facility, a lot of the facilities are outside, but are there any other ones? When you start adding the non-TSA areas in it, are there any other ones that we should be in this comp plan?
So I think that's
You
also
see
why
my
we,
point?
yes, I do see your comment, Commissioner Carter. I think that's also kind of why we use the combination of the enhanced street network from the TSA area, and we use the transportation plan map itself that goes a little bit outside the TSA to kind of develop that.
I see
So
that.
if there's an area that you all think that, and this is kind of what I think we've asked this, we want to make sure we continue to ask it. If there's an area that you all think that is lacking in connectivity, both either going from itself to another village center or from itself to the train station areas, then please highlight that for us, and we can definitely delve into it with this group in terms of saying, well, what can we enhance or build up to in order to kind of create that connectivity. Again, we want to make sure that we're doing this with you all. So that I think that's what I wanted to kind of emphasize.
Relative to Mike's comment and also back to John Carter, Mark Malcolm speaking. Herndon Monroe, grid of streets, what's shown with taken out by what John and Lynn had done. The grid of streets on the eastern side is the T-Mobile property. And that grid of streets actually does exist in the existing office park. Relative to what is on the western side, what was intended to be two streets being shown. One would support Bill Penniman's thing of how to get traffic off of Fairfax County Parkway to support the Herndon Monroe station by having a street from Monroe. That property is actually Board of Supervisors property. What is remaining? It's adjacent to the Arboretum property owned by Massachusetts Mutual. Those still need to be considered very directly. Relative to the grid of streets, that presentation that we had, I would strongly suggest that the Monroe Street connector to the Herndon Station, TOD, be looked at for inclusion very specifically to be addressed in order to deal with traffic from the west, get it off of Sunrise Valley Drive, and to alleviate things coming from Fairfax County Parkway from the eastern direction. That would help Reston in total.
Maybe you could help us maybe draw on the lines. I think you have to help us out what the grid should be in that area.
Because one of the streets that's on the western side now exists. It was the connection to the west side of the older park and ride garage. What's missing is now a trail that was built as a proffer for Woodland Park East. That eventually is intended to be a road if you ever develop the TOD Board of Supervisors property to the 50-50 mix. The T-Mobile property against the old comprehensive plan was intended to become a residential.
Can't hear.
Underutilized. Anyway, we're off topic with that relative to transportation.
Hey, Mark, are you willing to take up John Carter's invitation and work for him and Lynn to show on Lynn and John Carter's proposed grid of streets what you mean about the Monroe Street connection?
Yes, I can work with them for that.
Good.
John, could I ask one question of John Carter? And that is, John Carter, you said that about a third of the future development, I think that was your number, is not going to be in the TSA areas. In which case, where are you talking about? Because, I mean, are you just talking Northtown Center? Or is there some other areas you're expecting to be developed?
Well, this would be another conversation, but in short, there's a lot of development proposed in the village centers right now.
Right.
There are areas outside the village centers in the, let's see, what is it? I hate to mention it because it's fiery. It's those apartment buildings
Yeah. What John is referring to what is proposed in the current plan.
Right. That's not necessarily how it's going to end up.
Many of these need much greater scrutiny in the course of the
Yeah.
Okay.
But what I was particularly concerned about is the land use discussion today has been around the transit station areas. We didn't talk a lot about the rest of it. And I just wanted to make sure we have all the facilities that we're looking for in the rest of it.
Could I mention? Oh, go ahead, John.
I will point out, and Tom Bashadny has been a good partner in this dialogue over the last several years, and he's looking for funding to check it out. But one of my big concerns, which APAP is also taking, is the impact of the TSA and other development in Reston on congestion and other transportation problems in non-TSA Reston.
Yes, that's part of my point.
That needs to be studied badly.
I ask one other, or make one question. A recent P&Z meeting, a proposal was early stages of discussion. Proposal was floated to do some townhouse developments on the old Fannie Mae property. And someone, I don't remember who it was, suggested a connection making a connection between American Dreamway and North Shore Drive, which would be a relatively short one, which would allow people who live on North Shore to get to Sunset Hills and the Plaza America. I guarantee you there was no the developer hasn't agreed to that. So I don't want to say anything beyond. It seemed like an interesting idea because it's a very short connection, and you can't say that American Dreamway is over busy right now. So it might be something you want to look at, Mike. It's a profit in the future.
Any other questions?
Yes.
So that connection already exists between North Shore Drive and American Dreamway. There's a sidewalk, which is it cuts down the distance a lot for people interested in getting to shopping destinations south of Sunset Hills. But it's a really handy shortcut. Goes through that Fannie Mae property, but it's not a road; it's a sidewalk connecting to American Dreamway.
Yeah, I think that the idea that somebody threw out was to make a road connection. Obviously not a major road, but just something that would let drivers go. I don't have any opinion on it. It just seemed like it was the shortest connection I ever saw, so it seemed like it might be a good one. Anyway.
Okay.
John?
Yes, Gary.
Yeah, I've been having my hand up for about 15 minutes now.
I'm sorry, Gary. I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Did you use the electronic hand or your own hand?
The electronic one, and occasionally my own. But,
okay.
I just had for the early part of the presentation, I had a couple of comments. One, I think, and I brought this up before, we need to look at what's going to happen in the future post-COVID. And there's a lot of information that talks about, expanded use of cars and reduced use of mass transit. So I just think we need to keep that in mind as we're going through this and look at it and not, assume that everything is going to be just the same as we go into the future. The other thing, talking about, encouraging the use of metro, just as a personal example, I lived in a much larger building than I do today. I live in a pretty large one, but much larger in Reston Town Center. And there was a free shuttle from about 6:30 in the morning to 10, and then from 4 in the afternoon till, 6:30 or 7, I guess. And to go to Wiley Metro. And almost nobody took it. When I retired, I was about the only person going to DC after I retired that I would go and use that. And people just really want to use their cars, and they would drive to the Wiley Metro when that was running every half an hour. So I think we need to keep in mind what people want to do and not think they're going to be forced into other alternatives when that may make a choice of whether to be in Reston something different than it's envisioned to be. So I just wanted to give you that example. And I will say, I guess one of Bill's comments, Bill Penniman, about Reston Parkway, I disagree a little bit. I want people to come into Reston, not be totally discouraged. So I think the expansion that was talked about is probably a good idea. We just need to talk about that some more as we go through this. So those are my comments.
Thank you for your 3 comments, Gary. Any other questions or questions to or comments to our presenters from Fairfax County DOT?
John, this is David Donnell. I've got a couple of things to say. First of all, I apologize. I had an unavoidable scheduling conflict just as I was trying to log on to the meeting. So I'm about 40 minutes late. So I saw some of Mike's presentation. I'm sorry I didn't see it all. The only comment I would make in terms of the grid of streets is that I hope what you folks saw was a robust representation of the grid of streets. It seems to me that if we don't do that correctly, those links to the non-TSA areas are not going to be made. And so in any event, I hope that what we have is a robust effort at identifying the grid of streets. And I think I'm not sure that I concur with the idea of not including proposed because that's what, as Mark Looney had said, that's what that's been the past. That's and how it's done and funded and all that other stuff. One thing about the widening of South Lakes, the widening of South Reston Parkway. We've all been on interstates when VDOT or Pennsylvania DOT or Ohio DOT or NC DOT are doing road improvements. And so the highway is 4 lanes wide in each way, and all of a sudden it's 1 or it's 2, and that backs up traffic much more effectively than and creates delays much more effectively than just not having that extra lane. I concur that we ought to push that traffic coming into Reston from the north and the south. Would be a whole lot better in the future coming down the Parkway or up the Parkway and getting into Reston from the Parkway rather than shooting through Reston and using Reston Parkway. Yeah, the other thing is I'm not altogether clear, and I should know this, but I'm not altogether clear why the visceral dislike of this road to nowhere. And I would appreciate it if Mike could extrapolate on that from the county's perspective and from a historical perspective of why this is such a. It's almost like a conspiracy, and I'm not quite sure what that's all about. So, Mike, if you could, give us the.
I don't know that Mike is the best to represent the animus against this. David?
No, I'm not looking for the animus. I've heard the animus. I want to hear what a non-partisan observer views it.
Sure. So what we did is we added it as part of the grid to the network. I think what happened is that it wasn't as much attention as paid to elements of the grid, and there was talk of the golf course redeveloping, and people saw the element of that particular grid and the golf course redevelopment as kind of one and the same. It was never our intention to kind of link the two, but that's just inevitably how they've gotten linked. So I think, and I don't want to speak entirely for the community, so I think that's kind of what the community wants to protect the golf course. We want to protect the golf course. I think we understand that. I think we were looking for a way to, when the county was doing it, we were looking for a way to kind of help Sunset Hills, just to the south, to kind of with some additional linkages, east and west. Like one of the things about the street network is to kind of provide redundant and connection so that we have the ability to disperse traffic and create additional walking, biking paths and transit paths and, you know, buses for sure. So I think that's kind of, at least from what we've kind of observed. So, but again, I don't want to speak for the community, but that's at least why it was done, but I understand where the community is coming from.
Okay, that's a little clearer. And I am all in favor of leaving that golf course as a golf course. And I'm wondering if this road to nowhere could become a path to somewhere and just remain a path, remain a walking pathway, a biking pathway, because the connection does make sense to me. Just not used as a you know, 2-lane or 4-lane road, for gosh sakes.
Thank you, David. Your question is noted. Okay, any other questions of our brethren from Fairfax County DOT? At least for tonight. Okay, I hear none.
Wait a minute, I've got one.
Okay, Jan?
Yeah, it's just, I noticed that Reston Parkway is one lane is closed indefinitely. Is there any kind of a guesstimate as to whether the bridge will ever get repaired enough to be able to open that lane again?
So it's currently closed right now. So I think what they're doing is there's a sidewalk rehabilitation to kind of to widen the sidewalk there in conjunction with the Silver Line Phase 2. So hopefully when that's done, then they pick the barriers up and they open the lane back up.
I thought it was a truck that ran into the bridge and caused some structural damage in that lane.
If that's the case, we'll need to talk with VDOT and ask about that, because VDOT would be the ones doing the repair.
Okay.
Yeah, Mike, this is Walter Alcorn. I could jump in there. Yeah, I had the same question, Jan, for VDOT about 10 days ago when I had them on a call. They didn't have a specific timeline for me. They told me that it's taking a little bit longer because they're different responsible parties for different pieces of it. Unfortunately, some of it is MWA's and some of it is VDOT's. And so it's taken a while to figure out, you know, who's doing which parts. But I think that's been resolved and they're going forward with reconstruction.
Good news. Thank you.
Thank you, Walter. Good to see you.
Yeah, okay. Just lurking.
That lurking is good. In this case. Okay. Any other questions or comments? Okay. Fairfax County DOT guys, thank you very much for showing up in force, and giving a good explanation and fielding all the questions. So, okay, Walter, did you want to say something more, or?
No, only I do want to thank the FCDOT folks as well for hanging in there through all this. This is a lot of work this subgroup's been doing, and you know, this is I appreciate, Mike, your explanation of that road a few minutes ago. That was, I think, very well put. And I've made my views known about keeping the golf course, so I won't say anything more on that. Thank you.
And I would add this, not in defense of Fairfax County DOT, but just so we have the facts clearly in sight, that what was developed during the course of the Reston network analysis, and then in the funding plan for those improvements, is all a response. This was not invented by the sheer imagination of Fairfax County DOT, but it was their response to a set of densities that they were given by the comprehensive plan. They did not choose the densities, but once the densities were established, they had to decide a way to make transportation possible within those densities. Now, we are going to have an opportunity, albeit limited, to re-examine some of the densities. And so that might affect that. But so what Fairfax County DOT has done is to respond to, they were saddled with the same densities we were in the comprehensive plan, 2013-14 comprehensive plan. So, okay. Thank you, guys. All right. But before, so last time we had added our comments up to and including page 7, I believe. Is that true of the consolidated Just Chuck Carter text?
Yes, through the facilities, what we did today.
Okay. Okay. And that's what led to, and because the transportation, the roadway improvements were in those last pages, that's why we had this conversation. And I'm very grateful for this conversation. I think we all have a better sense of why things happened and what opportunity there is to modify it. So we want to proceed, and I'm wondering, it's now 25 till 9.
Oh.
Whether we should jump into the succeeding pages. Let's not waste our time because it's hard for us to find time. But let me tell you that as I look through the Just Chuck Carter draft, I noted that there are some 14 figures that need to be examined. So between this meeting and our next meeting, I'm going to make a table of those where they are, and I would ask all of you to take a hard look at the tables to see, and when I say all of you, I mean both members of the task force, members of MTAC, members of Fairfax County DOT, to see if there's any work that needs to be done on those figures. Obviously, what we write in the text will change the figures, but take a look at it because we need to figure out a way to do the graphics for those figures also, okay? Not just text, but graphics. So I will take it upon myself to send out a list of those 14 some odd figures so that we can begin thinking about how we'll deal with it. And indeed, some may not need work. I don't know, for example, how much work the bike trails is going to need further, but does that make sense? Makes sense?
Thank you so much for taking that on, John.
Okay.
So Burton is going to look closely at the bike trails, right?
Burton, your name was just invoked as an authority here.
Sure I will. Sure I will.
Okay.
But I do have a question actually on this. I don't have Microsoft Word on my computer, so when I open up the draft, I see what appear to be placeholders for figures, but I don't see the actual figures. So is that a fault of my computer, or is that just the way it is?
No, there are no figures in the draft.
Yeah, you have to go to the corresponding places in the comprehensive plan itself. And when I send out my table, Burton, I will reference both the location in the Just Chuck Carter text and also in the current text of the comp plan. Okay. So you'll be able to find the figures. Okay. Okay. Do we have enough steam to start up again?
John, could I ask a question
Sure,
of Mark Looney? Mark Looney, please put your county attorney hat back on. Because as I was looking at the draft sketch, whatever it is, of grid of streets, I noticed the one related to the Wheelie area has a general statement, local street grid to be determined. Is that sufficient if you're still there, Mark, or is that, do we actually need to just pencil in some lines even if they're be changed later?
I think that's in the Association Drive area. Is where that is.
No, actually, it's the whole area from Wheelie to the west and Wheelie to the east.
Right. So big picture, Bill, the answer is that the grid of streets or the roads that are shown in the comprehensive plan are things that could potentially be, I'll call it public improvements, meaning they're not necessarily dependent on developments to provide. And so consequently, if the county wanted to utilize public funds or VDOT wanted to utilize public funds to be able to build it, unless it's shown on the comprehensive plan or there's a determination that what's proposed is in, I'll call it substantial conformance with the comprehensive plan, and there's a particular process by which the county has to confirm that, they can't use public funds to be able to do it. By contrast, there are some roads and street networks that are likely to be provided only in the context of a redevelopment based on the particular layouts of the proposal. And as an example, if you think about where Wegmans is going in at the Reston Crescent development, there is an east-west spine road that runs parallel to the toll road that currently is a right-in, right-out off of Reston Parkway, kind of halfway between the toll road exit ramp and Sunrise Valley Drive. That street connection is shown, I believe, in the comprehensive plan as part of the grid of streets. But there are then local streets internal to the development that connect to that east-west spine road that are not currently, to my recollection, shown on the grid of streets plans and were designed and approved as part of the now Halley Rise, then Reston Crescent development. And so that's, I believe, what is contemplated by the language in the comprehensive plan, that the local grid of streets internal to a development that don't rise to the level of being, I'll call it a network or a regional improvement, would be identified as part of the zoning process. Same thing happened with Reston Station, Line, Isaac Newton Square. Pretty much every significant multi-acre development that's gone in has at least one or two local street grid connections that weren't identified on the comprehensive plan, but nonetheless facilitate the connectivity that is contemplated by the plan.
So are you saying that if it's not in there, only the developers can pay for it, the county can't contribute, or?
As a general matter, that's right. It would be, the way I think about it is that these are local streets necessary to access the development that is proposed. And the reality is when you come through the process, developers spend a fairly significant amount of time dealing with Mike Garcia and Jeff Herman and others at the county on exactly what the street connections look like, where you load parking and loading docks off of it. Commissioner Carter will ask where your FedEx delivery truck parking spaces are. I mean, there's just a whole confluence of details that get worked out during the zoning process for how you're going to access the parking garages, how you're going to access the loading docks, et cetera. And 70% of the time, those connections are off of, I'll call them internal street connections that are not part of the official grid of streets within the comprehensive plan. They can be added later once they're approved and developed. In terms of kind of the first time you conceive of them, it's in large measure driven by the development that's proposed and how many of those connections you need to facilitate access.
What has happened in some areas is that the grid of streets, I'll editorialize a little bit, kind of sweep across the landscape a little bit in some of the cases. They don't really take advantage of the topography, and some of them go right down the middle of streams. What happens during the review process sometimes, not always, is the grid becomes the grid itself, and it makes it very difficult for some of the developers to move those streets or delete some. And that has caused a lot of problems in some of the areas. So we're taking a chance, and I was just thinking maybe we could advance the way we put these down. And is that note that Mike put down was pretty good, although he misspelled accommodate. But other than that, a way to be able to move those streets when it makes sense and to avoid this notion of sweeping roads across the bad topography and down through the middle of streams. So that's the other side of this.
Agreed.
And Association Drive, I think, is probably one of the better examples where we're not really sure what the grid, and if somebody comes up with one, that would be fine, but I think that one is a little suspect. And where was the other one? I forget. Oh, the northeast corner of the intersection of Wheelie and Sunset Hills is also a little suspect to me because of the pretty extreme topography in those areas. So maybe just another look at it, and maybe Mike's note, if that was added. I don't think that's in the comp plan, and I think it should be. Give the developers some flexibility to do the right thing, which is what, I mean, we've got a lot of eyes looking at this. And so I think the right thing can happen. We just need to be careful of making these things down in concrete when they really don't have that kind of look at them. And I think you've experienced this some, Mark, in some of the cases.
Yeah, correct. I mean, it's, go ahead, John.
If I may ask the question from a slightly different angle, would it be sufficient? I hear you saying we need to establish the legal basis for seeking financing for these roads. We need to have something in the comp plan that establishes the legal basis for that, whether it be by the county, by grants, or by proffers from developers. Would it be sufficient in some cases to have not lines on a figure, but rather words? So we would put lines. We would put lines where feasible. Where it's not feasible, we would have notes that say we need a connection between point A and point B.
Yeah.
Is that sufficient?
So I'm going to wear two hats, and I'm going to answer the question two different ways that are completely diametrically opposed to one another. On the one hand, I always describe these comprehensive plan road designations as Sharpies on a page, right? Because to John's point, there's not engineering data that goes with it when it's shown on the plan. It's kind of like if we provide a connection here, it will deviate X% of traffic off of another road, which serves the overall network and provides connectivity in a way that facilitates the development that we'd like to see in and around these areas. And so in certain respects, the Sharpie on the page is sort of independent of the engineering details that go with it. By contrast, if you don't show the Sharpie on the page and you kind of leave it to words, it becomes a little harder for the county and or developers on the backside to defend, if you will, how and why a connection is requested as part of a zoning. And I have a real world example of this to the west, where out by the innovation station, I have a client who built a half section of a planned 4-lane road on its property, leaving the other half to an adjacent parcel, kind of splitting the 4-lane section, half on our side, half on their side. And their side property owner has appealed the zoning decision, saying that the road connection, because the comprehensive plan wasn't more specific that it ought to go on our client's property versus their property, they have no obligation to accept any of that road network on their property. And we're into 2.5, almost 3 years of litigation filed against the county over this road connection that's held up our client's development. And it'll be another 3 or 4 months before we'll get a decision out of the Virginia Supreme Court as to whether the development can proceed or whether we have to go back to the county for further action. My point is, the lines can sometimes make a difference, largely because of it's an assertion by the county that this is a critical component that is needed for the overall network, and can I'll say give, and I'm speaking against my own professional interest when I say this, but it gives the county more authority to say this is the connection that needs to be had, and the property owners need to accommodate it as part of the development. If it's words, it's a lot more open to subjectivity and interpretation later on. Again, it's still, you still got a lot of engineering stuff to work out, and there are, to John's point, there are connections that probably will never get made, largely because the cost benefit of bridging over a 50-foot ravine outweigh the benefits of the connection. But you're only going to figure that out kind of once you dive into the details of it. And I think, you know, to the conversation earlier about the road from or to, or whatever it is, to nowhere, you know, there's engineering details that go along with that that make it challenging, independent of the impacts on the golf course property. And so in certain respects, you know, I'm a big believer in better connectivity all around, but the benefits of that project may be outweighed by the cost of constructing it in a way that that project never, or that road connection never gets built for reasons that have nothing to do with the golf course operations.
Well, as a suggestion, why don't we just, I think we're smart enough at this point in time, since a lot of these have been approved already, and some of them are getting built. Why don't we just take a look at them station by station, and we'll give our best stab at the best way to depict this. If words will do it in some of these unknown areas, then maybe that's okay. If it's not, then we'll throw down a grid of some kind. But I just tell you, a lot of them are done. The most egregious ones, I think, are Northtown Center and probably Association Drive, and maybe the areas east of Wheelie. But I think we can figure it out. We just take a look at it and see what you think.
Okay.
So back to John's point, John Mooney's point, we should be looking at the graphics associated with all this.
Yes, exactly.
And we should all be looking at that, taking off from the conversation that John Carter and Mark just had.
Yeah, that's my suggestion. Let's just take a look at the graphics and see.
Okay. And so it's now 10 to 9. With your agreement, I'm not going to get into another major thing. I think we need to close out the meeting and begin to prepare for our next one. What I distributed or redistributed this evening was the proposed revision of the enhanced roadway network sections in the comp plan, that the revision done by John Carter and Lynn Mulston. And perhaps we can start with that next time, okay? So John and Lynn, will you still lead us through that at the beginning of our next meeting?
Be happy to.
Okay. So
I will also take all these facilities that we talked about and put it on preferably one page with all the details as well. I'll give that a try.
Okay.
So we can see it all together.
Okay. So we did not progress on item 5 of our agenda. I propose that for our March the 2nd meeting, we continue the live markup of the Just Chuck Carter text, and starting out with a discussion of the enhanced roadway section. I will also have sent you a list of all the figures. I would ask you to look at them and be prepared to report back on any changes you are aware of that need to be made in those figures, obviously contingent on the text we come up with. And that invitation is extended not only to members of the working group, but also to the MTAC folks and the Fairfax County DOT folks. Does that make sense for next time?
Yes.
I was thinking of a little bit more, believe it or not. These are short sections in the plan right now, and there's probably going to be a need for creativity coming in, going beyond the plans. The public transit, there's like one paragraph on public transit. The transportation management, I suspect that might be controversial. It's very short. And then maybe even the bikeways. I wonder if we couldn't tackle the bikeways. It's probably, well, it's sort of well written. It's the same section in the plan twice, but we don't have any new connections. And we talked about it a little bit tonight, particularly on those roads over the Dulles toll road. But I wonder if public transit, bikeways, and transportation, if I could put those into the draft now. And if we get to it, we get to it next week. But I'm anxious to move along.
Actually, John Carter and I discussed this before the meeting, and I agreed that we would begin with, I think it's appropriate to see what you, John Carter, and you, Lynn, have done on the street networks, and then do bikeways, public transit, and then transportation management. And I do have a lot of concerns that I'm going to bring up about transportation management. So does that make sense?
I'll put it together, and it'll be just pretty much from the comp plan as is. I don't know that, well, bikeways, I've got some ideas for it, probably some bikeway information, although we talked about them all tonight. So I'll just put that together unless there's some objection. But I have a very thick skin, and I'm very patient with whatever the comments are. We also got a letter or an email from Bill Penniman, and I don't know if everybody else got that. I thought there were some good points in that.
Yes.
So I don't know, we could just discuss that by itself, or
I think that's yeah, that's a good suggestion. Bill put a lot of thought into seven big points.
Yeah.
And I think it would do us well to spend some time in going over those in the next meeting too. Okay.
And I also wrote a letter in response to Bill.
Right, I saw that. Yes.
I don't think I did, but so I would be glad to get it.
Jan took exception to some of the emphasis on reducing single occupancy vehicles.
Transportation management. Yeah.
I was mainly taking exception to gridlock, making more gridlock. That's my main point. Is we've already got gridlock. We're not alleviating it by adding gridlock.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that better. Okay. All right. We have a plan for next week. Okay. I thought this was a very rich presentation and conversation tonight. Thanks everyone who helped. So if I could have is there any new business that we need to handle tonight?
Just remind us of the date for the next meeting.
The next meeting is March
2nd.
Mr. Chairman, if I could for a second, just to John Carter and to Lynn, in looking at the grid street network that you had, in my mind, it would be helpful to overlay some of the other improvements that the county has on top of that, like the toll road crossings in particular, to understand how those elements all work together. I think what you have is helpful, but I think seeing the overall network, not just the local components of this, would be beneficial just for folks to have a big picture understanding, number one. And then number two, if you or somebody could just circle or highlight locations where you've removed or modified certain things, just so we can see that and understand kind of the before and after, that would be helpful. Because I have a sense that we're really focused on 2 or 3 improvements that are, I'll call it, coming off of the plan, and that the rest of them are really just additions to reflect approvals that have been granted.
Right.
And if that's the case, then the conversation may be relatively short on that, if we can just see the before and after components.
Okay.
Thanks for that suggestion, Mark.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other new business?
I'd like to move that we adjourn.
I second.
Okay. Is there any nasty person who wants to object? Okay. Thank you, everyone, for all your work. Hey, thank you,
John.
Thanks for making this possible.
Thank you, Jose.
Thank you very much, John.
Good evening, guys.
Night. Thank you, John.